So what is your kind of recap of 2023 for Eastern Europe?
2023 for Eastern Europe. Well, if I was summing up one word, I would say it's still a shit show. And pretty much similar to 2022, I would say. I didn't see many different developments.
But there were some developments in Poland, right?
Yes. Well, if you're talking about the international system, I would say it's still the same. Maybe it will change next year with the American elections, which is weird, by the way, that elections will influence East so much. But yes, in Poland, we had a very major change. Basically, we managed to elect a new government. We had 8 years of a government that pretty much was very similar to, Viktor Orban and trying to erode democracy and like very anti-EU and very wing and trying to subjugate all of the branch of government. And 3 different opposition parties won the government right now, and they're trying to turn the process back right now. And I wish them all the best.
But Kaczynski is still there, so to speak.
He is still there, but he's pretty much a lost cause. Like you can see that he isn't handling what's happening right now very well. Whenever he appears in the parliament, you can see that he's super tired. He's very weak. He loses his temper very easily. After the expose of the new prime minister in the parliament, he walked up and started speaking like, some gibberish like, "Oh, you are all government agents. You should be in the government." Like, it's not some person who's calm would say. You could see that he's speaking, and he really didn't expect that he's going to lose. He had the entire government machine working for them for their campaign. You had companies owned by the government who basically did their campaign for them. They had the public media which did their campaign for them, and they still lost. They invested so much money and still lost, and they're not handling it well. And everything they have worked for 8 years, it's being undone right now. So I don't see a future for Kaczynski in politics, to be honest.
But what does PiS still control?
So right now they still control the constitutional court. So when they came to power, they elected new members of the constitutional court, which was unconstitutional.
Okay.
Which is fun. So the constitutional court already had all of its members chosen. They elected new ones, and they called it the Constitutional Tribunal. So they still control that. Up until last week, they still controlled the public media, but last week, the new government pretty much stormed the new public media by force and took it away from them. What did they control? Yeah, I would say some instances of the court system, they still control some of the government-owned companies, but they're losing control day by day. And I think probably somewhere at the beginning of the next year, they will be mostly gone from the entire country. Well, not country, but from the political system. And they still control the president, which is kind of important, but not so important in the Polish political system. The president veto laws, but those vetoes can be circumvented. So
overall current shifts towards more of a democratic government.
Yes, very much. And it's very interesting because they still won the election. Like PiS had the majority of the votes. But all of the other parties combined had way more, and they created the government. So they chose their own prime minister and are controlling the government right now.
Okay. And what are the major events like for 2024 for Polish politics? What would you like?
I would say that Poland slowly probably get back into European politics because Poland was very much on the sidelines. And right now you have a former president of the European Council ruling the country. And I think, already Poland has announced that it's going to participate in more of the programs of the EU. Like, for example, there is such an institution as the Procurator of the European Union, which is basically the judiciary of the European Union. Poland has announced that it's going to join. In terms of foreign policy, I think there will be way much more cooperation because Poland was very much isolationist when it came to foreign policy. Only good relations that Poland had was still with the US, which still wasn't really perfect because, for example, the Polish government tried to take over a privately media and TV station, which was owned by Americans. When they tried to take it over, the Americans got pissed and the US ambassador intervened and, the state. They got better when the war started because suddenly Poland was needed as a, logistics hub. So the Polish-American relations got better. But then again, our neighbors hated us, like Germany. They had enough. Lithuanians, they had enough. Ukrainians, they were grateful for all of the tanks, but still the relations weren't that great. And now I think Poland will participate more, especially in the European politics. But I also don't think that Polish policy towards Ukraine will change. I still think that there will be a lot of support. I see no change there.
Okay. But I think in relation to Ukraine, the bigger picture is more important. But I've seen some argument. I guess there was some article where they not argue for Poland to take almost like a leadership role in European affairs, which sounds pretty interesting.
This is why Poland is a very big proponent of the idea of admitting Ukraine into the European Union, because Poland expects that Ukraine would vote similarly to Poland on many issues. And, Ukraine and Poland combined would be enough to overvote Germany, for example, which Poland right now cannot do at all. It's a smaller country with fewer citizens, but together with Ukraine, it will be enough to overvote France and Germany, which right now Eastern Europe can't really do in European politics. You can see that still Western Europe dominates when it comes to politics in Brussels. But with the accession of Ukraine, this could shift the center of balance, and I think that Poland is really hoping for that.
Okay. But I guess in 2023, wasn't there some tension between Poland and Ukraine?
There was, especially when it came to the export of grain. So Polish agriculture isn't really doing that great. And when the European Union opened its markets to Ukrainian grain to help the Ukrainian economy, it really hurt a lot of Polish agriculture because the prices of grain fell. So the Polish government went against the EU and introduced an embargo on Ukrainian grain, which they couldn't do according to EU laws, but they still did it. And this really, pissed off a lot of Ukrainians because they were relying on the grain exports. So finally, they reached a deal that the grain could enter Poland, but it couldn't stay there, transit to EU countries. And honestly, I think this policy will remain in place, even though we have a more democratic government that wants to be more in line with EU laws. I still think they might uphold this embargo because, their voters are at stake and they want to protect the domestic market, of course. So this is some real politic here playing.
Coming back to national interest, I guess.
Exactly, yeah, especially in those trying times.
Yeah.
And, people in Poland were pretty annoyed, saying, we gave you half of our military equipment and you guys are still pissed because we're protecting our own markets. So there was, some tension there for sure.
They still need some more.
They still need more, yes. And this is why Poland is buying so much military stuff so that they can send more of their own older equipment to Ukraine.
But I mean, mostly, of course, I would guess they mostly rely on American support in relation to, if you look at the redistribution of the support, American support is the biggest chunk by far. It's there's nothing else in comparison.
Yes, absolutely. When it comes to the volume and the numbers, the American support for Ukraine cannot be matched by anybody else. What was very helpful for Ukrainians when it comes to the Polish support was that the tanks and the artillery and all of the things that Poland gave to Ukraine pretty much ready to use by Ukrainians because they knew those systems very well. They knew how to operate 72 tanks. They knew how to operate the Gwozdika self-propelled howitzers because they had exactly the same models. The problem with Western equipment is, it is much better and much more modern, but you need to train. You have to train both the soldiers, the commanders, you have to train the mechanics, how to maintain them. So even when the West finally agreed to send, Abrams and Leopards, you still needed at least half a year to train everyone. And with the Polish equipment, you just send it, it's ready to use. So that was pretty much crucial for Ukraine in the beginning of the war because it could help to make up for the losses that they suffered in the first year of the war. But now, not so much. Poland really pretty much gave everything it could when it comes to post-Soviet equipment, and now Ukraine will have to rely way much more on US and probably Western Europe.
Yeah, and also decisions regarding the support, they come with a hesitancy and delay speak. So
yes,
it's a little bit, of course, annoying for what we discussed previously, annoying for Ukrainians, and it also definitely doesn't let them. I mean, it doesn't allow them to war as active as they could.
Yeah, when it comes to Western support, I would say that the West supplies Ukraine enough for them to keep fighting, but not to keep winning.
That's exactly what propaganda says.
And well, that's the propaganda. It doesn't purely lie. It just gives you the reality and shifts so that it fits your own narrative. Maybe it adds some, lies and there, but there always has to be some grain of truth in propaganda for it to be effective. And well, that is the truth. Like, why didn't NATO and the European Union and the Americans give Ukrainian tanks in February of 2022? Why they give large missiles in March of 2022? Why didn't they give F-16s in? They still didn't give them. It's 2 years. The war has been raging for 2 years, and they still didn't any airplanes. So you can see they're just dosing military support. Just imagine the situation. Remember when the first successful Ukrainian counter-offensive around Kharkiv? Imagine if Ukrainians had Leopards, Abrams, F-16s, long-range missiles then. This could have gone differently. Right now, it's too late for the support to be effective. You could see that they just gave enough for Ukraine to keep, maybe winning some local successes, but not really to win this war.
Actually, if we can kind of backtrack in the sense of to explore this idea, it was before also the Russian escalation. In a way, it was before Russia announced annexation of those territories and kind of put mostly the end of any type of negotiations potentially, because now the issue is officially it's part of Russian territory, and now you have to deal with this issue of basically lands that Russia occupied, which makes it almost impossible for Ukraine to agree to any type of negotiations. And makes the situation way much more complex,
exactly,
and way much more impossible to solve in diplomatic fashion.
Yeah, I still think that the current situation makes it impossible for any of the sides to actually negotiate because, I think I said exactly the same thing last year. If any government in Kiev agrees to cede territory to Russia, they're done politically. Nobody will ever support them because, the Ukrainians are pretty nationalist. You have to give it to them. They will not stand for giving away Ukrainian lands. And the same goes for Putin. He cannot admit defeat and just withdraw from Ukraine. I don't see any area where these two countries can negotiate. I think both of them like to fight until the end. Question is, who runs out of the will and supplies to do it first? I think this is what Putin is counting on, is that there will be some change in Western politics and the support for Ukraine stops, which is, something that very might as well happen. It's very possible. And then Russia will have an easier time. I still don't think they could conquer the entirety of Ukraine and annex it into Russia, but, they could just walk up to the Dnipro River and just annex these lands. That's very much a possibility.
Or they can just wait and see. That's my general prediction is what I guess discussed a lot off mic is also kind of I hinted on this in our previous episode, is this idea that if you try to analytically look forward in the sense of how situation develop, to me it's it's a very stirring example of 2015. So you have some form of the end of escalation and the beginning of this, you can say it's small era of stagnation. You think through Russian perspective, it allows to completely rebound economically. It will definitely, it's already adapted to sanctions.
Yes.
So it in 3 years, you expect 3-5% GDP growth. You can expect Russia to really adapt to sanction regime, one of the most severe sanction regime in the history of the world, and to then to plan something ahead, and not in a way. I don't think Russia has really malign intentions against other nations, but if the dynamic is in the way it is now, so if dynamic leads us to this kind of negative confrontation, and it's they will be just step by step this deterioration of relations, they will just further step by step deterioration of relations, so to speak.
So you mean with Russia vis-a-vis the West, right?
Yes, and it will be just again step by step, because even if you think through if you just think carefully, from 2015 2000, like 2021. I mean, nothing drastically really happened during this period of time, but step by step, relations deteriorated. You had like, famous Skripal poisoning. You had, of course, there were sanctions were in place. You had like those small events that attributed to bad dynamic.
Yes.
Or basically dynamic of confrontation. And I really think that's where we are now. In a way, it's like this stagnation period. And here it's very interesting because, like, thinking historically, I really don't think we're at this time for like a bigger conflict. But if developments, if things that develop in the way they do now, and you have stagnation with minute like moments of further escalation, most likely there will be another big escalation in the future.
And how exactly do you define stagnation?
It's just nothing changed. There is a kind of like a status quo in a sense, like there is a frozen conflict. I mean, there's some.
I wouldn't say that the conflict is frozen. Quite the contrary.
Yeah, but if you move, even if you take like one cell, it's not like you take. It's not like you take
our city. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's not like you take a Kharkiv. So it's nothing really groundbreaking happening.
True. Yeah, I agree with you that the stagnation on the front line. It's there, I would say. I mean, Russia is making gains right now, but very slowly. But I think you also have to keep in mind that both sides are investing enormously in this war. So it's not like Russia just, or either side just decided, okay, yeah, let's chill with these front lines. Both of them are trying very, very hard to change the front line. So stagnation is the outcome, not the goal that both of the countries want to reach. Yeah. Russia is trying hard to push right now.
And in the meantime, I feel they're fine with like freezing it.
Yes.
And I don't think again freezing it not in some official ceasefire, but maybe freezing it in a way of how things are now. Let's keep it like it is. So let's not even shoot for this. It's not like don't have like second wave of mobilization. So let's just keep things as they are. Using conscripts probably for replenishing those or just like changing people on the front line. And then you have and just waiting again for maybe we can discuss further in the episode for American elections and just looking at the how situation is like being played out, so to speak. And of course, it's like for me, it's actually this period. If you can go back to 2015, and again, if you could have, if someone could have solved the problem of Crimea, right, like back then in 2016-17, I mean, I would definitely argue they could have prevented bigger war. Again, most likely by offering something Russia in exchange for, not giving back Crimea, but not going further to Ukraine, so to speak. Or I mean, it's kind of vague. I don't really want to go in this direction. But you know what I mean.
I know there was still some space for some compromise.
Yeah, and now I feel it's where it's like, but it's also if you think through the lens of Russian leadership, they went through the same type of cycle, like literally. There was like very big escalation with the West. There was like heavy. I mean, of course, and for Russian economy, like the year of 2015 was the hardest year. Like every subsequent year was a little better until you reached just regular economic growth. And looking into the future, I mean, Putin is securing his whatever he has, fifth of sixth, and now he being reelected in 2024. He looks into 6 years, more years, and you could see like, and him like going through the same kind of cycle, in a way, like trying to keep things as they are, both like internally in Russia and kind of like in this kind of Eastern European playground of international politics, so to speak. And then if it's kind of move into this confrontational dynamic further and further, probably escalate again.
What would be your bet? What would this escalation be?
I mean, I guess we all, and it's not like I think it would be a surprise if they start something with Baltic states, especially with the pretext of Russian speakers and stuff like this. It's easy it's not easy. It just makes perfect sense from even like Russian audience to choose if you want to choose like to escalate on the international arena. That would be like definitely Baltic state.
And this is exactly why, back to what we discussed earlier, at the beginning of the war, when I said the West, the West is still supplying Ukraine enough to fighting the war but not winning, I think the only countries that really wanted Ukraine to win as soon as possible were Baltics and Poland. These countries really wanted Russia to fail as soon as possible. All of the memes with Poland in Article 5, they're just memes, but there was something to it. Like, people wanted Russia to lose very, very badly. Yeah. And in the West, people were like more, yeah, cool, let's give Ukraine weapons. They're going to solve our problem for us. They're going to fight Russia so that we don't have to. Let's not push them too hard so that Russia doesn't start using nukes. Yeah. And countries that really feel threatened by Russia, which is definitely the Baltics, which are very small countries, but they still, when you look at the support they are giving, it's small compared to the American support, of course, but when you look at the size of it, it's enormous. Same goes for, I feel like these countries really wanted to support Ukraine to win, but the rest, not so much. They feel threatened by Russia, because if something happens, these countries are the first to go.
Very vulnerable.
Exactly.
And also, again, after the experience in Ukraine, that's actually kind of like a piece of a cake for, like, I guess, logistics perspective, because they really cut the whole route from the NATO, and because of the Kaliningrad, obviously. And it's not like they care about people in Kaliningrad or they care about human lives. So
yeah, we know that they
don't. But again, it's interesting that if you think we're at the same kind of like at the crossroads. And I mean, again, it's not inevitable that we'll have a conflict in the future, but most likely, if the dynamic is the same, it's like, and you have like those, like, you have this quo. I feel for now, you can say this is like a status quo. Mm-hmm. It's like the whole year, nothing really happened, in the sense of the war.
The last major shift was in November 22 when Ukraine recaptured Kherson, and that's it.
I mean, definitely had a lot of back and forth from in the media in relation who gonna make the move, and obviously Ukrainian counteroffensive failed. There was like a big kind of backlash in the Western media. Why did that happen? Blah blah. I mean, to be honest, it's very surprising but whatever.
Yeah,
it's up for those analysts to kind of to make analysis of their own mistakes, I guess.
True,
but. Overall, again, if you look into the broader arc, I would really strongly argue that we are at this kind of juncture that going further we will live through this stagnation, while you have the snippets of further escalation. And again, like if you think just think 2015 to 2020, like nothing really happened that deteriorated relations further. But they were like those moments of tension. And actually, if you look at official Russian rhetoric, so if you read Russian diplomats, what is like interesting that they actually talk about this openly. Mm-hmm. So they say like, we are not, so our intentions are not really confrontational with the West. However, if we see that the West still doesn't recognize our legitimate kind of national security interests, we are ready for the worst case scenario. So that's their language, kind of how they frame. So
like preparing the ground for this deterioration.
Fun thing, like no one reads really like primary sources, and it's like,
oh yeah, we discussed it.
In a way, it's like no matter like what they say, people take like one phrase from the whole interview. I don't know. You can take like Lavrov's interview for press conference for the results of 2023. It's like you can they take just one phrase and then they kind of put it in the headline, that is fits like Western narrative. But once you read like the whole kind of how the person thinks and how he as a professional replies to like questions, you could see they're very kind of logical. It's not like they lack logic. They have like this very deliberate way of thinking, which shows you, and again, deliberate in the sense, again, it's not Putin's ambitions as such, but it's just foreign policy apparatus, how they frame their own, so to speak. And it's like, again, I think what they say a lot, it's just we are we don't want further confrontation, but we look into this dynamic, and if nothing, if they continue being aggressive, kind of they continue again supplying Ukraine with weapons, they continue confrontational dynamic, we are ready for the worst case scenario.
Well, so you said that in 2015 there was still some room to prevent escalation. Where do you see this room right now? What can be done to prevent it? Because honestly, I don't see its ground right now.
I mean, the way I look at this, it definitely should be on the level of the US-Russia negotiation. And what's interesting, you can also bring how Russians, actually suddenly for Americans, disconnected the whole strategic, because now they don't have like any type of agreements on nuclear.
True.
And they said like openly that this idea that, we and it's also true because in all arguments, the US framed Russia as an enemy. And, they kind of want this like kind of like a cherry picking, like we should still create a nuclear, which, it sounds a little bit absurd.
True.
They disconnected from political reality, and they said it's not acceptable for us to kind of like work on strategic dialogue without them recognizing our interests, which is like an interesting. It's actually a pretty big development because it also shows you what we discussed previously, that Russia also understands that it is not treated the same way as Soviet Union.
Yes,
because the Soviet Union strategic dialogue was extremely important, because the idea that Soviet Union gonna obliterate the US was very vivid.
Yeah, not much with Russia. True.
Not so much for Russia.
Even though Russia still could do it.
Yeah, it still could. But I guess the idea is that the US is not afraid of Russia. Mostly because, I guess if you think like that, strategically, the US is way much superior militarily. And it's not like anyone expects Russia to go bonkers and really start nuking the US without no good reason. Yeah. But rather, after the US brings some really big kind of defeat to Russia itself militarily, like let's say destroy whatever military bases across Russia, drop some, maybe takes back Crimea.
Yeah,
and it can
it totally could do that.
Yeah, the US is very strong, and it's not the same type of the Russian type of peer competitor. And of course, this dialogue is only possible if this again kind of rethinks its thinking. But of course, knowing the US, and it's really not possible, because understanding that, I think the West itself and the US in specifically has troubles critically assessing its own actions.
Okay, so let's assume we have a power in the US the next year, the election. Donald Trump comes to power. Don't you think that he will rethink Biden's policies?
I think Donald Trump as a person probably, he will definitely meet with Putin. I don't think it's for him, there's no problem meeting Putin. But most likely, again, it's this meeting is just the tip of the iceberg, in the sense that there's so much preparation beneath it. And I feel all the State Department, what you call a deep state, in a way, how people think in Washington is just there is no way anything good can happen from this meeting. Mm-hmm. So whatever you have, it's just maybe some communique about the necessity to foster relations or to reconcile both parties. Nothing special. Which it's to be. I don't want to sound grim and stuff like this, as we all usually do. But again, if you think analytically, I guess the problem is, of course, the US doesn't have this critical assessment of its own actions. The idea of you need to have some feedback loop where your kind of failures, you assess them, and it's okay it's okay to make mistakes. But it's detrimental. It's completely detrimental not to assess that you make mistakes.
True.
That's really bad. So again, if they feedback loop, then the cycle kind of probably continues, and you have again what I call the snippets of escalation, where it's back and forth, so to speak.
But when we speak about war in Ukraine and Trump coming to the White House, all it would take to change the dynamic was would be just to stop the military support for Ukraine. Like Ukraine would definitely lose without the American military support. And Trump can do that. Even like the deep state, as we call it, wouldn't be able to prevent him.
But like, imagine how like the support is being just done in American politics. You already have all the necessary budget allocation that has been done by someone that has like budget has been prepared. It's been like calculated. Like every piece of military equipment, like in the Pentagon, like they already had like all the contracts. It's also like a business for them, right? It's
true.
It's a little bit. It's also, you need to think in American perspective. It's all business like.
Yeah, the lobbyists have their interests.
So they all calculated and they all kind of budgeted it. So it's not like go ahead and just completely cut it off. Like, you're gonna lose jobs. You're gonna lose support, so to speak, right?
When you piss off big business, you might lose paid support, for finances.
Yeah.
Because it's totally okay in the US for companies to support certain candidates.
Yes, exactly. I mean, of course, what they can do, they can try to influence Ukrainians. But as you said, of course, Ukrainians, I also do believe, and what we discussed previously, it's not that they don't have, they do. So it's not that they would willingly negotiate with Russians without understanding what they get in return.
Exactly.
But then, of course, the question is like what they can get in return even if the US can pro negotiations. It's like, in a way, it's like there should be some solution to this conflict. Like, what I mean? It's like eventually, if you make, like, you need to find a solution that kind of like overlaps like all the kind of sides, potentially. That everyone, both like Ukrainians, Russians, like Americans, kind of more or less satisfied. Europeans.
Well, I guess that's the nature of compromise. Nobody is fully satisfied, right? But here,
at least they do, in a sense, benefit from it, because otherwise, again, you just end up in a bigger conflict, right? That's the.
Yeah, I don't want to sound too pessimist, but I honestly don't think I see a diplomatic solution to the current situation. I see only three possible solutions. Is either Russia unexpectedly, collapses, like you have some other Prigozhin doing a coup or something that you cannot predict, or Ukraine collapses unexpectedly in a similar manner, or the support for Ukraine from the West stops and Ukraine loses. Honestly, I think those are the only options for this conflict to end, and all of them are, military solutions, not diplomatic solutions.
But do you think, in a way, it's like a third option? If Ukraine loses, it like really loses, like in the sense of like losing like all the territory, or like completely, like.
It happened, but I still don't think this will be a very major win for Russia. I don't think Russia could control the entirety of Ukraine. Just look at Chechnya, how hard it was to get Chechnya under control. Now imagine having a country 200 times bigger, and majority of which, especially in the West, hates you. It will be hard to pull off. But still call it a win if Russia captured all of the Ukrainian lands up to the Dnieper River and managed maybe to install some puppet government in Kiev. That would be a major for Russia. And I do think it's possible, unlikely but possible.
Okay. I would say unlikely, but possible.
I honestly think that either one or the other countries collapses first, and it will be solved on the battlefield.
Yeah. It'll just freezes in the way it is now.
But you see, if it freezes, it just gives both of the sides time to replenish their forces. I legit think if some ceasefire is reached, even informal ceasefire, what's Ukraine gonna do with this time when there's no fighting? Regroup, get more equipment from the West, get more F-16s, maybe even more of everything. What is Russia gonna do with this? The same thing. Get more tanks from North Korea. It will just be prolonging the same thing. This is why I think it's not in the interest of any of the sides to have a ceasefire. I still think
not a ceasefire. I don't think it's gonna be because official ceasefire. It's actually hard to imagine than the solution for me, because the solution ceasefire would kind of indicate already the solution in the ceasefire, because and having a ceasefire for Ukrainian would mean that they 100% never going to get back those territories.
True. Yes.
It just means that they accept they lose it already. So there is like this kind of risk, right? So for me, it's actually hard to imagine that they agree on ceasefire.
So do I. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I think just left this idea of it's either one of them collapse,
or Ukraine losing support from the West and collapse.
Or Ukraine losing support from the West. But do you think it can potentially happen?
I think out of the three scenarios, the most plausible one is Ukraine losing support from West. And all it takes is some right-wing politicians getting elected in countries like Germany or France or the US.
Yeah, but you mean financial support or militarily support?
Both.
Kind of both.
Both.
Yeah.
I mean, the country is running entirely on Western support. Like on its own, Ukraine would be in so much trouble right now. Maybe probably lost some of our land. It's entirely running on Western support, and there's no hiding that. So if you just stop the flow of any supplies, be it financial or military, I don't think Ukraine can keep with the current war effort.
Maybe sounds like we uncovered the mind of Vladimir Putin here.
Yes, no. Well, what we were discussing here, I'm sure Putin knows as well, and he's gambling that he is able to withstand this war longer than the West can. I still think that the West, especially I think countries like Poland and Baltic states, I think there's this dynamic that whenever Ukraine starts losing somewhere on the front line, suddenly there's like this big awakening in Western Europe, and there's like, holy shit, we should do something about it. But as long as there's nothing going on, they don't really care. So I do think that if suddenly the Ukrainian front line collapses somewhere and Russia captures a lot of territory, I'm sure Ukraine will get some more support from the West, whoever is in power. But still, that's supplying Ukraine enough to keep fighting, but not winning.
Okay. Well, that makes it definitely like a grim picture for Ukraine, and of course for the West, because there's now. It also makes a kind of I would frame it this way. It also makes me think that the West really doesn't have a legitimate strategy.
Yes,
like long-term
so
strategy.
As well.
It's like whatever they're doing, it's almost like a reaction. It's like immediate reaction to some action.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then they completely lose the understanding of what are their real goals here. And it's actually like a bigger problem because it maybe shows that whatever Putin is doing, like he's doing it way much more strategic.
Yes, that's true. And I think it all comes down to the fact that Putin is running one country and the West is, a collective of different countries. Even though it's clear that the US runs NATO, it cannot influence every single member of NATO to give military equipment to Ukraine. So there's no coherent strategy because different members of NATO have different interests. And, Putin doesn't have this problem.
Yeah, but also in a way they don't. Again, it comes back maybe even to American power. And what is actually American strategy? And do they have strategy?
Americans also don't have a strategy. That's true.
And if Americans, I would say they do have a strategy vis-a-vis China.
Yes.
In a way, it's a long-term strategy, but it isn't, so to speak. And all the kind of events or like all the actions in relation to the war in Ukraine are more like reactions.
Yeah, they definitely focus more on China right now, and I think they're also annoyed with Europeans. You have Russia, which is economically, 2 times weaker than Germany, and basically the same economy as it. And I guess politicians in are kind of hoping that Europe will get their shit together and work out a strategy for Europe, which it hasn't done so far. But yeah, I guess they're just banking that, it'll be okay. It's not really that much of an interest for us. Like, even if Ukraine falls entirely, it won't harm the US too much. Really, it won't. Taiwan, on the other hand, if China captures Taiwan and cuts off trade routes all over the Pacific, it's big problem for the US. So it's natural that they focus more over there. I would say that, as we discussed when discussing your paper, their engagement in Ukraine is more normative than strategic. Yeah. So it's, upholding, showing the world that they are still the leader and that they're supporting countries fighting for democracy and fighting evil authoritarian regimes. But it's not really in their interest for Ukraine to recapture Crimea. They don't really get anything from it. So they're sort of hoping Ukraine keeps on fighting. We supply them with military equipment for them to keep Russia busy so that Russia doesn't do something stupid against us. And it's a win for them. Yeah. Europe, on the other hand, I don't think Europe has figured out any strategy at all when it comes to Russia.
Yeah, one type of the strategy that you could see in the Washington is something like they expect. I mean, they understand that the change of power in Russia would be probably very drastic, yes, and you could expect, like, of course, the collapse of the state. And if you think from the time frame or kind of into the future, so this is probably like 10 years into the future, you could see already the fragility of the state. While at the same time, I mean, you definitely can expect, even if Trump is being reelected, I definitely see them still kind of supporting Ukraine. And again, as you said, if it collapses, maybe they take more land, so to speak, and like the conflict and settles on the Dnieper River, whatever. They would still kind of like bet a lot of on the fact that Putin regime eventually collapses.
Yeah,
which is. I mean, in
it's
a way,
a gamble.
It's in a way, it's also a strategy, and it also happened already through, of course, Soviet Union.
Yeah, Russia has a history of unexpected collapses.
Collapse, and of course, and here, like being very specific, it comes down to the change of power in modern Russia, because there is no way it will be smooth. Like, it's really hard to imagine the transition of power smooth in Russia. Yeah. Given all the problems and things in so to speak, the overall developments, that it will be very smooth.
So what do you think is Russia's grand strategy here, starting this war and continuing it right now? I think that the Kremlin knows that Russia doesn't have a bright future, even if it suddenly captures the entirety of Ukraine and wins this war. Russia doesn't have such a bright future, I would say. What is the Kremlin's thinking?
I mean, I have a kind of a couple of ideas that are maybe not really connected. We can maybe try to kind of like disentangle them. I mean, I really think on like if you're trying to think through the actions of Russian leadership, also the actions that they undertook in zeros. I think what they try to achieve, they kind of envision maybe different West, and they try to kind of force the West into the direction where Russia has a say, like, and in particular say in European affairs, including in European Union and not necessarily again, politically and economically. Yeah. So it has a say, it has a certain leverage and authority in what it does, so to speak, and it's like that. I mean, I truly believe that one of the things Russia tries to achieve is just to preserve this, like what they call sovereignty. Mm-hmm. I mean, that to me it seems that's the official rhetoric, and just like there are all those type of indications that whatever like Putin is doing, it is really deeply to this idea of like we are sovereign. It's like we can do. I mean, we are actually actors. It's like we are not like some countries that can only be given instructions. That we are doers.
We're not the puppets, exactly.
We are not the puppets. That's I think like one idea. So I, given that I always think that Russian government and people in government, they're very damn smart. It's not that they don't understand like style democracy. I mean, their kids probably studied at best universities in the world, and they know
in democratic countries.
Of course, yeah, and they know stuff in a sense. It's not. It doesn't take like a genius to read all the same foreign affairs article to understand like the essence of Western debate, so to speak. And I feel this is like maybe their kind of like maybe they trying to get a bigger voice in the Western politics itself. And I feel it really connects it to the idea of, if you think through Russia, like as they like to call it, like the Third Rome, and was it's actually even with the Soviet Union, like in a way, Soviet Union, if you think through, I mean, it was also the West. It's hard to say that the Soviet Union was non-West.
It was very Western.
Very Western, very scientific. Like the apex of like science. Like they kind of literally built scientific society. I mean, didn't work in practice,
but they tried.
They tried.
They tried to be more Western than the West.
They tried to be more Western than the West. And I mean, it's interesting for me. It's like a schema, like, a scheme from like whatever, like it's like the West, like, from the Roman Empire, it's split. And I really think like the real Rome is probably actually, and this is like a Constantinople, like that's Moscow.
Yeah.
And they're really fighting for this idea of the West itself, so to speak. I mean, this is like one of my kind of, again, like one type of idea that I have. That's and this is probably like long-term strategy. So getting this, I mean, can like so in a nutshell, it's getting the sovereignty to have a bigger influence on like European politics. And maybe then trying to envision, if you think through China perspective, if you try to, and if you had, and I mean what China tries actually to do, imagine like Eurasia, like which basically means Europe and Asia, as a one space, not just Europe. I mean, I don't know, take a train to Shanghai, which maybe like, I mean, I meant to say, not to sound stupid, but maybe it takes you 10 hours to get to Shanghai on the train. And imagine you have like the whole like, continent, like in its entirety, like being interconnected and developed, so to speak.
Do you think this is the Russian vision?
I think it's not necessarily the Russian vision, but that's what that's the idea that's subscribed to.
Okay.
And they see themselves, like, again, not necessarily as the sole authority here, but one of the poles that has like significant impact. Not like it's not like it doesn't rule it, but it rules this idea of interconnected space, so to speak, right? Well, kind of like maybe what they try to envision in like 100 years, how it looks like.
Yeah, the question is, if in their bid for sovereignty vis-a-vis the West, what is China's role here? Because China, I think, is really happy with the situation, and Russian dependence on China grows as the war progresses, on Chinese military support and North Korean military support. Yeah. So the question is, if Russia didn't perhaps gamble too much and become reliant on China in this bid for sovereignty.
I mean, it does in a way, but the way that it doesn't hurt. I mean, they don't exchange their sovereignty for Chinese support, so to speak. I mean, they try to, this idea of they're kind of on equal footing, in a way, like no one dispatches like, telegrams from Beijing to Moscow, so to speak, what they should do, what they shouldn't do.
True.
In this or that event. Or there's no, like, if you think even through think tanks and how it works in transatlantic community, there's no shame that Germany doesn't want to supply weapons to Ukraine. So in a way, there is no shame. It's like Russia not going to shame China that they don't supply like weapons or something like this. Like,
That is true. Yes.
So there is like they just navigate in realities of their own interests. So like, while both like enrich, like China tries to enrich itself through Russian resources, like cheap oil, cheap gas, cheap materials, whatever cheap you can get. And Russia just gets whatever it cannot get from the West now, which is like predominantly technology, like chips, whatever. And I mean, of course, it gives you like an interesting dynamic, because I don't envision like Russia being a nation state.
Yeah, a
like
lot would have to change.
Yeah, I don't see that Russia erases. Like, also going further, even if it may be some Putin for Russia to be like, they call Eurasian state. But like to completely erase, like I don't see like Russia erasing its European history, but rather just giving, like, taking this opportunity that they have with China, develop further as a kind of still Russians, like still European Slavic state, if you say. But very interesting. They mentioned that it's not influenced by America anymore.
Yeah, something else.
And I mean, it's influenced by America actually entirely, and because what's interesting also in relation to Ukraine, and I guess if you hold like this the whole thing with Aristovich, who I mean obviously like a former Ukrainian like advisor to Zelensky, and now he has like this rhetoric. This is kind of pro Russian, like in a way it's like weirdly pro Putin, like that. Like Ukrainians actually can get really disappointed in the US and in the West eventually. What we discussed maybe in relation to my paper, all this, I mean, middle fingers that they eat now, like, they will just like, we ate enough middle fingers here.
Actually, this is something that, a long time ago, but something that the Hungarians learned. So you remember when Hungary had their huge uprising against the Soviet Union and the Soviet Union invaded Hungary, the Hungarians really thought that they would receive support from the West. Yeah. They really, they said, we are here fighting for the West and we are fighting for Europe. Yeah. And they received zero support. So this is, I guess, disappointing for them. Yeah. Sadly, Ukraine might suffer such a disappointment as well eventually in the future. But maybe it's the topic for a next episode to discuss. Probably, yes. This will be too deep.
How do Slavic states relate to each other? Because I feel what is also missing, and of course no one discusses it, is this like also interconnected of like Slavic nations like themselves, so to speak. Which topic? It's like Slavic nations per se way much more interconnected, like culturally than like Germany, France, Denmark, like England. Like they are not connected at all. Like
I would say Slavs are one huge dysfunctional family.
Exactly. Maybe it's the perfect title for the next episode.
The dysfunctional family of Slavic countries. Sounds perfect.
To be united.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you very much. And
thank you.
We'll see each other next episode.
And next year, I guess.
Yeah, sure.